I'm Scott Russo, professor of neuroscience and psychiatry and director of the Brain and Body Research Center here at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. My laboratory studies the interactions between the brain and the body in health and disease, with a particular emphasis on bidirectional interactions that drive comorbid diseases, for example, like depression and cardiovascular disease risk or irritable bowel syndrome. Until recently, we thought really that the brain and the body were separate entities, cordoned off by something that we call the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier is a collection of cells that lines the blood vessels and protects your brain by preventing things from the periphery that are in circulation from accessing your brain and having effects that are not intended. Emerging research over the past couple of years has really shown that this barrier is not quite as impermeable as we once thought it to be. It's very dynamic. It can open and close in response to dynamic actions in the environment. And in doing so, it can allow for things in the periphery to access the brain in ways that we didn't quite appreciate previously. So, weakening of the barrier, we now know, is associated with a host of psychiatric illnesses, from depression to schizophrenia, as well as a number of neurological conditions like Alzheimer's disease and other related dementias. It's really the connections between our brain and body that impact our mental health in very profound ways. And in fact, conversely, our mental health status can impact body health. And diseases of the brain are often associated with physical illnesses in the body. One example of this for most of us, I think, when we get anxious or nervous, we can sense our core body temperature rising. I know when I get nervous, my face gets warm, my body starts to warm up. Almost feels like a fever. This is actually called psychogenic fever. And it's really thought to be driven by a brain-to-body mechanism, whereby centers in your brain that we know regulate anxiety, they feed into peripheral organ systems, particularly those that house the immune system. And the immune system can then release inflammatory molecules that then drive up our internal body temperature. When we're sick, there's a purpose for us to have an increase in our internal body temperature. But under states of anxiety or stress, our body is kind of inappropriately responding to those stressors and causing this symptom that is unrelated to our body's state of infection. So research in my lab has recently focused on this bidirectional communication between the brain and the body. We've found that there are collections of cells within the hypothalamus and other stress-responsive regions in the brain. These cells are activated in response to stressors, and they project all the way out and innervate regions of the body, for example, our bone marrow. And our bone marrow is where all of our immune cells in the periphery are produced. So when these cells turn on, they can cause a massive increase in the levels of immune cells that we have circulating in our body. They can cause inflammation and then ultimately lead to psychiatric diseases by those immune cells interacting directly with the brain. But it's also important in this comorbidity that I was describing earlier. Depression, for example, is associated with an almost doubling in the risk of cardiovascular disease. If you do have a cardiovascular event and you have comorbid depression, you're far more likely to die from that event. And so the hypotheses around this has suggested that the brain is really communicating directly with the body, and that when things go wrong in the brain, it can often lead to diseases in the periphery. And one example of this is cardiovascular disease, as I mentioned. So these stress-responsive cells in the hypothalamus can actually, when activated, increase plaque progression, the potential for rupture, meaning that you can have a heart attack or a stroke more readily. And we do think that by calming down those stress centers in the brain, providing anxiety or stress relief is going to be greatly enhancing our ability to prevent or overcome the kind of deleterious effects of these cardiovascular events. So we believe that by harnessing this brain-to-body connection in meaningful ways to design therapeutics, we'll be able to unlock the body's potential at repairing itself and prevent a host of peripheral and central diseases.